For a multi-state training exercise this summer called JADE HELM 15. While the military says it's just training soldiers for the realities of war, critics say the Army is preparing for modern-day martial law.
What's happening is between July and September, a bunch of Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Special Ops from the Air Force and Marines are conducting some realistic training exercises across the Southwest. The military says these are vital skills when it comes to an ever-changing threat. But in the slideshow of the training exercise, it says Texas will be simulated hostile territory.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded.
Healthcare Reform Week 2. How about a little look at a little-known provision of the overhaul, which you may not have heard about, a reform law that calls for the creation of a 6,000-person army. Joining us now with more on the Ready Reserve is senior Fox News judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, before we get to it, you had some breaking news you just saw.
The state of Utah has just voted, and the governor has just signed into law legislation to condemn, that is, to use eminent domain on property owned by the federal government. This will be the first time in American history that a state has taken property from the federal government against its will by paying them for the property, as the feds have been doing for 230 years to the rest of us.
All right, Judge, let's just jump right into the segment. Ready Reserve is senior Fox News judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, before we get to it, you had some breaking news you just saw.
The state of Utah has just voted, and the governor has just signed into law legislation to condemn, that is, to use eminent domain on property owned by the federal government. This will be the first time in American history that a state has taken property from the federal government against its will by paying them for the property, as the feds have.
Breaking news you just saw.
The state of Utah has just voted, and the governor has just signed into law legislation to condemn, that is, to use eminent domain on property owned by the federal government. This will be the first time in American history that a state has taken property from the federal government against its will.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? How has the United States changed from a humble, peaceful republic into a police state? Tonight, freedom versus security. This past week, the United States Supreme Court told police that they could break down the door of your home if they smell what they think is smoke from the use of marijuana coming from inside. Last week, the Indiana Supreme Court told police in that state that they can enter a private home even if they're not looking for evidence of a crime. And yesterday, the Justice Department revealed that FBI and local police are executing sneak and peek warrants. They break into your home, seize an item, and don't tell you that they've done this for over 18 months. And they are doing this in ordinary criminal prosecutions, not just for the pursuit of terrorists as the law requires. This is all about the slow loss of personal liberty. Last year, my friend and colleague here at Fox, Glenn Beck, conducted a controversial experiment on air, aided by the use of a rubber frog in a pot of boiling water. Now, don't do this with a real frog because you'll kill it. Glenn demonstrated that if you throw the frog into the water when it's boiling, the frog jumps out. But if you throw the frog into cool water and raise the temperature slowly, the frog will never realize it's being cooked. This doesn't always work, but it's an old metaphor that sheds light on the self-evident truth. Radical change is immediately noticeable, not just when it is radical, but when it is disruptive. But if it happens slowly and in steps, if it happens in degrees, eventually the radical change will have happened and we will not have noticed it at all. America was founded on the belief that our rights come from God and they're inalienable. But in reality, our liberties have been in the decline from almost the moment of the conception of this great country. The Hateful Alien and Sedition Acts, which criminalized free speech that was critical of the government, were enacted in the 18th century by the same generation, indeed in some cases the same people, who adopted the First Amendment with its iconic language that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Those laws expired when Jefferson refused to enforce them. But 2 generations later, another president would argue that he could arrest state officials and newspaper editors with whom he had political differences. And 2 generations after that, the government enacted the Espionage Act of 1917, which made it a crime to speak out against World War I or to oppose the draft. And 2 generations after that, FDR arrested Japanese Americans and Italian Americans just because of their nationalities, and the Supreme Court let him get away with it. And 2 generations after that, the war on drugs was prosecuted to distract us from the disaster in Vietnam and the economic destruction brought about by wage and price controls and the rejection of the gold standard. Each of these assaults on freedom used the previous assault as a legal justification. Then something peculiar happened during the presidency of George W. Bush. In the aftermath of 9/11, the loss of liberty became more direct and more obvious. By the time of President Bush's second term, there was angry and vocal dissent to the loss of personal freedom. By then, federal agents were writing their own search warrants, bypassing judges. The government was monitoring the computer strokes of ordinary folks, not just alleged terrorists. The feds even prosecuted an 80-year-old librarian because she told her 75-year-old assistant that the FBI came calling at the public library where they both worked. One of the dissenters to all of this was a young junior senator from Illinois named Barack Obama. Now, of course, he's the president. President Obama's flip-flop on personal freedom has shown his almost magical transformation from a peaceful civil libertarian into an authoritarian who thinks he can start wars without congressional approval, dispatch police to break down doors of unsympathetic defendants, and wage a war on the wealthy. He's even demanded to know to whom business people have made political contributions before he will let the government do business with them. He wants to tax the most productive in our society, and he's nominated to lifetime federal court judgeships persons so out of the mainstream of legal thinking that even his fellow Democrats have opposed them. President Obama's post-9/11 world has radically redefined privacy laws, so much so that we allow the government to force us into nude photo booths and touch our children and babies in their most intimate places. Have you ever noticed that the government always claims that when it does these things, it does so in the name of safety? When is the last time you heard the government give, as a basis for its behavior, personal freedom? When is the last time you heard the government give, as a basis for its behavior, personal freedom? Some will say, come on, Judge, this is America, we're free. And I would say there are none who are so enslaved as those who falsely believe themselves to be free. Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter warned us about this 2 generations ago. He said, the loss of liberty rarely comes overnight. It usually comes because of well-intended people and the unintended consequences of their use and abuse of government to interfere in our lives.
I was in charge. I was the Ministry of Defense coordinator. My job was to man, train, and equip the Iraqi army in Al-Anbar, Najaf, Karbala, and northern Baghuz provinces. And I can tell you right now, well, somebody had the great idea to get rid of the Iraqi army, so when we rebuilt it, we did everything we could to make it as strong as possible. And I'll tell you right now, Homeland Security would kick their butts in a week. What's happening here is we're building a domestic military because it's unlawful or unconstitutional to use American troops on American soil. So what we're doing is we're building a military. My best friend, who's a SWAT officer in Nashua, who came to Iraq with me to train the Iraqi police, sent me an email with a picture of him in the media on the streets of Watertown, Mass, wearing the exact same combat gear that we had in Iraq, only it was a different color. And the way we do things in the military is called task organization. You take a command and then you attach units to it in order to accomplish the mission. What's happening is Homeland Security is pre-staging gear, equipment, consistent. What they're trying to do is use standardized vehicles, standardized equipment. I saw a picture in the Boston Globe during the marathon bombing where there was a state police officer, actually there were two officers, they both had identical helmets, flak jackets, weapons, everything I wore in Iraq, only it was all blue. The officer on one side had a big patch on his back that said Massachusetts State Police. Another officer next to him, his patch said Boston Police. And so what we're doing here, and let's not kid about it, we're building a domestic army and we're shrinking the military because the government is afraid of its own citizens. The last time more than 10 terrorists were in the same place at one time was September 11th, and all these vehicles in the world wouldn't have prevented it, nor would it have helped anybody. So I don't know where we're going to use this many vehicles and this many troops. Concord is just one little cog in the wheel. We're building an army over here, and I can't believe that people aren't seeing it. Is everybody blind? That's all I'll say.
That I've heard about, but also,
It knows the truth.
but yes, do you think this amendment that you got this draft today would prevent state employees from doing the types of things, home forced home inspections, but also limit local governments from trying to end-run what we have done so far in the legislature?
FEMA and DHS signed a contract with Russia to send troops here in the event of an emergency. It's no big secret, but we have new information on what they're doing here. They are buying nearly 600,000 AK-762 by 39mm caliber rifle magazines, 2 million rounds to be delivered to Camp Stanley in Texas of the same caliber. You also have a little over 500,000 going to the Bluegrass Army Depot. And you also have 9x18s that have been purchased. On top of that, people are like, well, what about the weapons? They're taking anywhere between 200 and 286 Kalashnikov AK-74 assault rifles.
I have received a possible emergency FEMA Region 3 alert. FEMA Region 3 consists of Washington, D.C., Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. This alert was sent to us by Senator Sheldon R. Songstadt, retired, of South Dakota State. This is Rev. Michelle Hopkins. Well, here is what the Senator's National Preparedness Research turned up. FEMA purchase orders for over $14.2 million for MREs and heater meals to be delivered to Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders for 2 million pouches of emergency water to be delivered to FEMA Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders for $13.6 million for MREs and heater meals to be delivered to Austin by October 1st. 9-week training course for UN peacekeepers in CONUS to learn urban warfare. They're learning urban warfare, and they need to learn English and U.S. weapons systems. We're having foreign soldiers learn our U.S. weapons systems. This has been going on since the 4th week of July for 386,000 troops to be completed by October 1st. 2,800 MRAPs must be delivered to DHS by October 1st. No leave will be allowed for U.S. military from September 28th through November 5th. NORCOM yearly training for civil unrest is to be suspended until September 27th to be performed in northeast coastal areas.